Bună dimineața și bine v-am regăsit la un nou sezon BU. Sunt Sabina Iosub și voi fi alături de dumneavoastră în fiecare sâmbătă dimineață de la 9:30 pentru a discuta cele mai importante teme europene care sigur că ne ajută sau ne afectează. Astăzi alături de mine este un om important în ceea ce înseamnă Parlamentul European. Today here with me in European Parliament in Strasbourg is Jaume Duch. Thank you so much for your presence.
Thanks for inviting me. Hello.
You are a very important person here. You are the spokesperson of the European Parliament. You are the General Director of the Communication area. It's a difficult job when talking about the European affairs.
I don't know if I'm an important person, but I try to be useful for the journalists, because this is the best way to be sure that the citizens will be well informed about what happens in this house, in the European Parliament. This is a very important, the Parliament is important on me. This is a very important Parliament where most of the key decisions for the future of the European citizens are taken, and our responsibility, our duty is to be sure that we can help you, the media, to spread what's happening here.
We can see now a totally different Parliament as compared to the last one, in terms of people who are part of it, in terms of majorities, and also, I think, in terms of things to be done in the near future. What do you think about this new situation?
It is true, this is really a new parliament, not just because it was elected some months ago, but because more than 60% of the members are new, and this means that the House is still in some way starting. They need to accommodate to the institution. It's also the fact, as you said, that this parliament now is more varied. I mean, creating majorities will be probably a little bit more difficult than in past times, but it will happen, because this is also a parliament which in its DNA there is dialogue, there is discussion, there is negotiation, there is also the search of consensus. So even if now when you observe you don't see a very clear majority in the hemicycle, this majority will appear piece of legislation by piece of legislation.
But only by negotiating the majority, putting everything on the table in order to gain.
But this is good. This is probably the best way of working. I mean that those parliaments where the political groups are not simply confronting each other, but are really negotiating, are trying to arrive to agreements, these are the parliaments which produce qualitative legislation, because it means that they are taking into consideration the needs and the opinions not only of one part of the society, but many other parts. Here, the members are adopting legislation for more than 500 million citizens, and of course the best is to do this, I wouldn't say together, but with huge and quite varied majorities. Why not?
I think it's also very important to look back for a little bit at the presence at the European elections. I think it's one of the best ways to empower the member of the European parliaments with strength in order to negotiate. They have the strength, the power of the people who voted them in a vast majority.
This is true. In fact, during the last European elections, we got for the first time since 1994 more people voting than abstaining. 51% of the citizens went to the polls, and in the case of Romania, more than 20 points of difference with the last elections. And this increase of people participating boosts, in fact, the legitimacy of the European Parliament, and in some way it's also good news after years and years where many people, including sometimes media or ourselves, were saying, yeah, but the citizens are disconnecting from the European Union, citizens are less and less interested about what happens with European institutions. No, the 26th May, there were more than 200 million citizens who participated in the vote, and now everything which will happen in this Parliament will be the direct consequence of the choices made by those people who went to vote.
Let's try to answer to a question. What can and actually does the European Parliament for the citizens?
Well, this is in some way, it's very easy to explain if you compare with a national parliament, because at the end of the day, their role is the same. What this parliament is doing is, first of all, is adopting legislation. The European Commission, which is a kind of a government, they prepare the draft legislation. But then there is a discussion, there is a negotiation in the parliament, also in the European Council, and then at some point there is an agreement or not. And when there is an agreement between the Council and the European Parliament, legislation is adopted and legislation will enter into force. Then this is, of course, the Parliament which has to decide about the budget of the European Union, as all parliaments. And this is also very important because, of course, you can come here with your program, with your priorities, with your to-do list, but then the real decisions are taken when you decide where are you putting the money. And then there is a third element, or there is, let's say, a third main task in this parliament, which is to control the government, in this case to control the Commission, because the members have been elected by the citizens, and through this legitimacy they can not only observe what the Commission is doing, but also control what they are doing or not doing.
It is very important to see exactly what the Parliament, the European Parliament, can do in order to keep in mind always when looking at the European Union that actually our daily events are connected somehow to what's happening here at the European level, and our lives are changing also in terms of the European discussions. I was thinking only about roaming, for example, a huge impact on our daily basis, or there are so many examples of legal procedures that were adopted here at the European level. What's to be done in the near future?
Well, first of all, I think that it's interesting for citizens, for people, to know that not only the decisions that are taken in this parliament come with a real effect on their lives, but also the fact that most of the work which is done by the national parliaments, in fact, is a follow-up, is a continuation of the decisions taken in the parliament. More than 60–70% of the legislation which is adopted by the national parliaments, in fact, is just the rediscussion and, let's say, application at the national level of the decision taken by this parliament in Strasbourg or in Brussels. That's also why it's so important to follow carefully what the European Parliament is doing. And in the next, the legislature which is starting, of course, will be again very important in terms of adopting legislation. It's not only the fact that in the next months we have to negotiate with the Council about the budget of the Union for the next 7 years, which of course is very important. It's the fact that it means also to reform the agriculture policy of the European Union, to reform the regional policy, the way of deciding how countries get money for their structures, for the regional funds. It's also the legislature where we have to improve legislation about immigration, about rights for refugees, and lots of things on social policies. I think that this will be a legislature with quite a strong accent in terms of social policies and not just economy. But it's also important, for example, to achieve, to end the construction of the economic and monetary union, to be sure that if at some point there is a new crisis, the European Union is ready to battle against it.
Let's focus for a little bit at the social discussions, let's say, the discussions that have a social impact. You've mentioned them. They are very important for each member state. I'm thinking, of course, for Romania, which is the most important thing to be discussed in the near future. Maybe you're thinking about Spain, your country. It's normal to do this. There are different societies, the member states are different. How can the European Parliament find the best way, the right way to do such a policy as one with a social impact?
Well, it's a question of finding the right balance. Of
Exactly.
course, the needs of Romania or Spain or Sweden or Italy are not the same, but this is why in the European Parliament it's important to have members from all countries who are really active and who can transmit also the national priorities, who in some way are there also to defend or to get European legislation which takes into account not only the needs of one part of Europe, being the north or south or east or west, but something which can be combined and which can in fact be beneficial for everybody. That's also why in some cases what the Parliament is adopting is not direct rules but directives. So
that have to be adapted to the national legislation.
Exactly. This is a kind of a frame which is the same for the whole European Union, but then it's a competence of the national parliaments to complete this frame, and in this, of course, respecting the red lines, the borders of this frame, to adopt the legislation in a way which is really matching with the needs of the country, in this case Romania, Portugal, or many others.
It's like when buying a suit, for example. It's the same suit, but different measures depending on each person.
You have to adapt to the client, of course.
Exactly.
It's a little bit, the example works.
What do we do with the Brexit?
This is a very good question for the British government, not for the European Union. I think that now everybody knows that the European Union did its work quite well. We were able to achieve a very good agreement with the British government to be sure that the way they leave the European Union is an orderly way, that this is something which in some way tries to reduce as much as possible the negative consequences, first for the British citizens, but also for the EU citizens who are living in Britain. The problem is that there has been no majority until now in the British Parliament about this agreement. There are many majorities against many things, but until now there was no majority in favor of an agreement, or this agreement in particular. Now, you are following, as we all are following, what's happening with the new Prime Minister. This week he was in Luxembourg. It was not very successful, but as Mr. Juncker and Mr. Barnier said last Wednesday here in Strasbourg, the European Union is ready, and now the question is what will happen in London.
We have to wait for the London decision. It's not the first time. It's not the European Union somehow tired of waiting and waiting when all is actually prepared on all levels in terms of exit?
Yes, I think that there is a feeling of tiredness in the institutions, not only in the Parliament, also in the Commission and in the Council, in the other member states. When you discuss with diplomats, when you discuss with the ministers of many countries, at some point you realize...
Somehow we've tried it all.
We tried it all for 3 years. Now everything is prepared and a decision must be taken by the British. Or they decide to stay for an extra period because they go for elections or because they go for a second referendum, or they leave. And of course, if they leave, it's much better if they leave on the basis of an agreement than with no agreement, because no agreement means that there will be some chaos probably at the other side of the channel, not this side. But I think that probably it's not only about being tired, it's also about realizing that what we need now is to look forward. Okay, maybe the British will leave the European Union in the next weeks. Let's see what happens. The question is what these 27 other members are ready to do together. We know that in the last year, sometimes the British government was a little bit of a break, and some decisions were not taken at the European level because there was a British veto. Okay, now the question is how we, in some way, we take advantage of the fact that we will be 27, and what these 27 would like to do together.
Let's focus a little bit on the European Parliament in terms of Brexit. Let's say that the Brexit is happening, I don't know, in the end of October, as Boris Johnson is saying, or
Yes.
It doesn't matter the date. What is happening in the near future after the Brexit in the European Parliament? The European member of the British member of the Parliament are leaving in the next day. What's happening with the European Parliament? Are in the next day coming those who are on the waiting list?
Yeah, well, the European Parliament is ready also for this situation, and in fact, we were ready in April when, when there was the first deadline for this Brexit, and everything is in the rules which were adopted before that date. What does it mean? It means that the day immediately, the minute after they will leave, this Parliament will be reduced in size from 751 to 705 members, which means that, of course, the British MEPs will leave the European Parliament. They will stop being members because you are not representing European citizens, so you cannot be a member of the European Parliament. And then it's true, those members those people who were elected waiting for the moment where the distribution of seats would be done, they will immediately, automatically become also members.
In terms of logistics, it might be a chaos.
No, I think that everything is ready. I mean, we were able to accommodate these 62% of members who are new in July, and now they are working in September in perfect material conditions. So the fact of, I mean, if the British members at some point have to leave because the country will leave, this can be politically sad. But from a technical point of view, this is something that we are perfectly ready to cope with.
That's very good to hear. Let's see here at the European level, what are, in your opinion, the hottest issues? Except Brexit, because we've discussed about it. You've said that the agriculture policy might be an issue with some deep discussions. Also, the budget, maybe. What else do you think?
I would say, first of all, of course, in the next weeks, the attention will be focused on the investiture of the new Commission. You know that in July, the Parliament voted in favor of Mrs. von der Leyen as the new President of the Commission. But right now, we are in the middle of a preparation for the hearings. The hearings are the exams that all the candidates to become commissioners have to pass in the European Parliament. Each commissioner, depending on his or her portfolio, has to spend almost 3 hours in front of the competent committee to answer to many, sometimes very difficult questions about the portfolio, about the policies this commissioner will be in charge of. And this is something which is politically very important, because at the end of this process, maybe everything runs smoothly, and then the 23rd of October, the Parliament can vote, can invest the whole College of Commissioners. Maybe not. And in the past, we know that there were always a couple of candidates who had difficulties because they were not really well prepared, or because they didn't, let's say, convince the competent committee. So this is what it's taking.
They were changed every time when they didn't pass the vote?
In some cases, they were replaced. In some cases, they stayed as commissioners, but there was a change in the number of competencies in their portfolios. So there was an adjustment about their responsibilities within the Commission.
I think that if we pause for a little bit and make silence, we can hear behind the doors the negotiations that are running in these hours, in these days, because in order to receive a vote in the Commission, a lot of negotiations are to be done now for those commissioners. What do you think will actually happen?
It will depend on the performance of the candidates. I mean, when a candidate is good or very good, there is no problem. It's very difficult for a committee to try to block the arrival of someone who is well prepared and who came to the parliament and who showed that he or she is really mastering the policies which are linked to the portfolio. The question is what will happen if it happens in the cases of some of these commissioners designate come to the committees and in fact they show that they are not well prepared, or that the ideas that they have about this portfolio are completely the opposite of what the majority of the committee thinks. So yes, probably there is a lot of talking about the next hearings, but I wouldn't say that there is a pre-negotiation. I would say that depending on the result of the hearings, depending on the performance of the candidates, the commissioners, then things will happen or not.
It's very probable to see in the end of October the Commission as a whole in the front of the plenary here in Strasbourg. From that moment on, if it's voted, of course, the Commission, we can say that we do have the new institutions in charge.
Yes, I think that, and there the date is the 1st November. If everything goes smoothly, the 1st November, the new commission will replace the current one, Mr. Juncker's one. The parliament is new, but it's working since July. And then, yes, at some point, also before the end of this year, there will be a new high representative for the foreign policy for the European Union and a new president of the European Council. So, yeah, we could say at that moment that all, let's say, the updating of the institutions has taken place, and that at least from this point of view, the institutions, the European Union, it's ready to cope with all the targets, all the priorities which will be in front of us during the next 5 years.
You've been to Romania.
Yes, of course.
How do you see us?
I mean, Romania, it's a country which is not very, very far from my own one, Spain, also because of the language or the family of language. I can recognize quite a lot of words because of Spanish or because of Catalan too. It's a country where...
It's more similar with Catalan, right?
Yes. I mean, sometimes I think that someone is talking Catalan, but I don't understand what he or she is saying. It's true. But I think more than that, it's a country which has improved enormously since it's a member of the European Union. I think it's probably one of the examples which show the difference about being in the European Union or being outside the European Union. You can compare Romania 20 years ago with Romania right now, and I think that this in some way are two different countries. It's a country, by the way, which was running a very successful European Union presidency right before the European elections, with many European legislation which was adopted thanks to the work of the ministers of the Romanian government, who were really working well here in Strasbourg or in Brussels. So all in all, it's let's say it's a good member state of the European Union.
Thank you so much for your presence and for your comments. Let's hope we will meet again soon in order to analyze the work of the new and fresh European Parliament.
Next time in Bucharest.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm waiting for you there. Iar vouă celor de acasă vă spun să rămâneți pe Antena 3. Nu uitați că ne revedem și sâmbătă viitoare la BU. Cu bine!